Our minds have systems, you might call them buffer systems. And a buffer is something in computer speak that holds a bunch of information waiting to go from one place to another. Well, our minds have these things, our brains, our sensory, mind, body, emotional system thingies that we have here. And we have them in all of our senses. We have them in touch, we have them in taste, we have them in smell, we have them in hearing, we have them in sight. It takes a little while for when we perceive something until it actually gets into the brain and is registered. The one that we want to talk about right now is the auditory. It's called the phonological loop. And the phonological loop is the audio buffering system. And from what I understand from scientists and from a brilliant guy named Roy Williams that I originally heard this from, when a sound enters the ear, it bounces around in the electrical memory for about 5 seconds as we're trying to figure out what to do with it. Is it important? Not important? And this is that mechanism that if you're talking to a child and at some point you say, you know what, you're not listening to me. And the child says, yes, I am. And you say, what did I say? And then they repeat your last 10 words back. And you're like, damn it. Because I know you weren't listening to me. It's the phonological loop. That information is just bouncing around in there. Well, as it turns out, there seem to be some things you can do with sounds to make them bounce around in there longer and have a higher probability of getting recorded into the chemical or the structural part of the brain. And when it comes to naming things, like your category or your product or the name of your company, if you use some of these techniques, you will have a higher probability of being remembered, higher probability of registering. If something registers in the brain, by the way, and gets repeated, we tend to become more familiar with it, and we actually tend to like things that we're familiar with. Just another little quirk of the human system. So the thing to remember here, you want to write this down, if you're naming something, is to use repetitive sounds. Because there's something about repetitive sounds that makes them bounce around in the phonological loop longer and makes them stick in the brain. And if you look out into the world and you just listen, you'll notice that sayings and names with repetitive sounds are the ones that get picked up. So some of my favorite names that I've seen out there that just stick, my very favorite one is Coca-Cola. 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 You hear all the repetitive sounds in there? Coca-Cola. And it has a little bit of a rhythm to it. We'll get to that in a second. Coca-Cola. You remember the first time you heard the name the Dixie Chicks? And you said, oh, that sounds kind of cool. Is it an accident that M&M's is one of the best-selling candies? And that the rapper, Eminem, became a cultural icon? I don't know. What are some of the common phrases out there that have repetitive sounds that just stick in our culture? The hip-hop culture likes phrases like junk in the trunk and cutie with a booty. Those would not have been the same if it would have been some stuff in the trunk. Okay, there's something about the rhyme that makes it stick. What are some other phrases? Double your dating. That's a good one. You snooze, you lose. Come on. What? Marilyn Monroe. Do you think that anyone would have heard of her if she would have kept her original name? Norma Jean Mortensen, and then Norma Jean Baker. Huh? Marilyn Manson was also a very good name. You might not like the artist, but great naming, great branding. How about Bed Bath & Beyond? Ozzy Osbourne. The BlackBerry. That's what I'm talking about. What's interesting about the BlackBerry, by the way, is that little handheld palm devices are now called BlackBerries universally. That's the name for those types of things. Now, Palm was the original creator. Remember the Palm Pilot? And we used to call it a Palm Pilot when they called it a Palm Pilot, but then they got big and cool, and they shortened it to Palm, which is not very memorable. And then BlackBerry came on the scene, and BlackBerry is memorable, and now it's the name for the category. And I'll bet you that if Palm Pilot would have kept the name Palm Pilot, they'd be doing a lot better just in terms of memorability. It's having market share and mind share. Is this registering here? So some other things that you can do, I love it when you say amazing. That's great. Amazing. Another thing you can do is add rhythm to your names. So when I named myself, because I've got a weird name, Eben Pagan, I wanted a name that wasn't that weird of a name. It wasn't to hide behind anything. It's truly just because I have a weird name, and because I wanted to have a name that was a better marketing name. I spent a long time creating the name David D'Angelo. DD, David D'Angelo. And there's a lot in there, by the way, a lot put into it. I'll just say right now, who was David? He was the little guy that made it against the big guy. That's who David was. There's a lot in the name David D'Angelo, by the way. Well, and there's something distinctive, the little D'Angelo, right? There's something else about David D'Angelo other than just the DD. Listen to the rhythm. David D'Angelo. Say it with me. David D'Angelo, David D'Angelo. It's triplets. It's 2 bars, two beats of a four-beat phrase, right? David D'Angelo, David D'Angelo. And as it turns out, David D'Angelo, double your dating. It's a whole phrase. Is this making sense? It's not, Google is a great name. It's not about making a name that's easy to remember. It's about making a name that's impossible to forget. It's not about making something that a person would say, oh, I like that, that's cute, I want to remember that. It's about making something that just pops up in their brain like a song. So if you're not naming things in a way that makes them go right into the brain and be remembered automatically, that have repetitive sounds and rhythm and so forth, you're probably losing a lot of the value that you could be getting. Emotional estimation and seeing only validation rear their ugly heads in things like naming things stuff that we like. Try having this conversation that I just had with you with a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed entrepreneur that's just named their business with their name in the title of the, right? Joan's Flowers and Things. And you say, Joan, it would be better if we made a name that was really, memorable. No, but it's about me and Joan's Flowers. This is my dream, and that's what we have is flowers and things. Right. What about Mrs. Fields? So here's the deal. More things, this is, let's say, how often would alliteration show up randomly? out there in the world. One in, let's say, every two-word phrase, one in every 26 two-word phrases. And it strikes me, and I've been paying attention for a while, that the things that just catch on as phrases, like I said, like junk in the trunk and cutie with a booty, they've got that repetitiveness. I mean, 3 out of 4 of them or something do. It also turns out, you need to read Al Reese and Jack Trout stuff, because a lot of this stuff I kind of got from them, that brands that are named well tend to do a lot better than brands that aren't named well. They just become worth a lot more. If Coca-Cola was named Fred's Soda, I don't think we would have ever heard of it. Really? Kodak camera. It's a good one. There are many examples. Now, there are many examples that go against this as well, but I'm just saying that we want to have every advantage we can possibly have, right?